Hello, thank you for listening to us this afternoon. What we are going to be talking about is how we introduced a safer disposal of cytotoxic waste. So, just a little bit of introduction to who we are. I'm Charlotte, I'm the lead chemotherapy nurse at Marsden and Tunbridge Wells NHS Trust. So we have a picture up here. We are a trust based over two sites, one in Marsden and one in Pembury. I'll introduce Nina.
Hi, I'm Nina Robinson. I'm an assistant practitioner for Marsden and Tunbridge Wells NHS Trust. I'm the first assistant practitioner for our trust. I've been working in oncology now for the last 11 years, and as part of my new role I now work with both haematology and oncology.
Okay, and I think it's only fair at this point I also introduce my colleague Gemma, who is on holiday and has left us to it.
Someone out.
But actually, she's been very pivotal in the work that we've done for introducing this new system. So I think it's only fair that we should mention her. She's actually the lead cancer nurse and we work very closely together. Okay, so the Kent Oncology Centre, as I've already said, serves a population of 1.8 million. We have approximately 8,000 new patients every year, so we are quite a large centre. We're quite unique in the fact that we have 30 or so consultants based with us that actually work out across 4 neighbouring trusts. So although the chemotherapy units are run by their individual trusts, we actually have the consultants that work for them. Our actual centre that we're responsible for comprises of 3 chemotherapy units, 1 larger and 2 smaller units, a level 2 haematology inpatient ward where we give a lot of high dose chemotherapy, as well as a oncology outpatients. We also house 9 linear radiotherapy suites, again across 2 trusts, 1 at Marsden, 5 to 6 at Marsden, and then a couple over at Canterbury. And the things that we specialise in the radiotherapy there, which we've been asked to mention obviously, is our MRR, the brachytherapy and SABRE. We also, I don't know if you're aware, but we also house a large research department and take an active role within research within the unit. Okay, so why did we introduce a safer method of cytotoxic waste? So I'm going to be totally honest, we were actually approached by a company that said, can I come in and demonstrate a Swedish manufactured heat sealing disposal airtight unit. So I was like, okay, that's fine, come in, demonstrate it to us. We weren't really sure what to expect, and I think it's fair to say we had no real obvious concerns about cytotoxic waste other than what we've already discussed today. So it wasn't that we had a problem with our cytotoxic waste, we just saw this as an opportunity that we could actually improve practice. So they came in and they demonstrated the unit, and I think it was very clear from that very first initial visit that actually myself and Gemma felt the benefits of the system were huge. And actually what we did is we went away, and then that caused us, a bit like Samantha and Alison, to look into more recent and historic literature to see how we could actually improve. For those of you that haven't seen it, I'm sure most of you have now, this is obviously what the Pactosafe unit looks like. This is obviously based in our chemotherapy unit over at Marsden. We just included this in case any of you haven't seen it. It is quite a large machine, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but actually we have found with workarounds there are ways that we have managed to incorporate it within our practice. I'm just going to hand you over to Nina now, who's going to talk about Pactosafe itself.
So for those of you that aren't familiar with Pactosafe, I'll just give you a brief insight into the system. So Pactosafe is a heat sealing system which has been designed for the safer handling and disposal of cytotoxic materials. Pactosafe boasts endless bag technology and has been designed to heat seal clinical waste within a specialised plastic. Now this plastic has been designed to be able to hold clinical waste without any leakage or degeneration of the plastic for up to 7 days. So what does that mean for its users? It means that for clinical staff, from the point of putting your clinical waste into the Pactosafe and sealing it, you know it is safe from there right to the point of incineration. As you can see, this slide is quite a detailed slide. However, I'm not going to discuss it in much length, but we've included it more for your reference post-presentation. The information does demonstrate some of the key features of Pactosafe. However, I will summarise some of the points. So it's a non-touch, airtight system. It's been clinically tested to be 100% safe, with airtight storage of your clinical infectious waste for, like I say, up to 7 days. And I'm sure I'm right in saying that when it was initially tested, they actually dumped a whole bag of cyclophosphamide into the plastic, sealed it, and after 7 days there was no degeneration of the plastic. It can be used for pretty much all clinical waste except for sharps. So if you were to put unsheathed needles, blades, broken ampules, that would break the plastic. But on the other hand, you know, we as a trust actually use safety needles. So we have successfully been trialling putting needles into our Pactosafes, and to date we've had no adverse incidents, touch wood. So the plastic is actually designed to be 4 times stronger than normal plastic. So I'm sure, as you know, with normal plastic, if you pierce it, it will continue to rip. With the Pactosafe plastic, if it was to pierce, it would just leave a hole. It wouldn't then continue to rip. It has easy to use foot pedal, so you know you can stay gloved while you're disposing of your waste. You can pop your stuff in, press the pedal, it seals it for you. The other thing is, because it's battery operated, it's nice and mobile, so you can actually take the unit. I know it is quite clunky, but you can take it to the point where you need it. So for us, we can actually take it to the patient while we're administering the treatment and dispose of our waste by the patient's side, and we know for them and us we're both safe. And the other design feature that we really like is, because of the stainless steel, it's very, very easy to clean, and that was something that's very key with our infection control. So, following on from our initial meeting with Nice's Medical and our lead nurses, there were some key highlights that we identified that we wanted to consider. And these could be summarised as, firstly, patient and staff safety, which was a key driver in introducing Pactosafe and implementing a change in our current practice. Secondly, glamorous assistant, we recognised that we'd be able to minimise impact on the environment, and I'm sure you'll all agree with me, lowering of carbon emissions is a very pivotal point at the moment and is something that our trust is very keen to champion. And finally, we wanted to look at its cost effectiveness to see if whether or not we'd be making any potential savings between using the Pactosafe to our current method of waste disposal of sharps bins. So looking a bit closer at patient and staff safety, when considering this patient and staff safety, we found that Pactosafe would enable us to improve safety for our clinical staff administering Sept by reducing any risk of accidental exposure through incorrect disposal of our cytotoxic waste. And this, I suppose you could say, could be caused by factors such as the ineffective use of ineffective and non-use of bungs and spigots on chemo bags and syringes, because unfortunately, as a trust, we currently don't have closed systems. It is something that we are seriously considering. And secondly, because we use cytotoxic sharps bins, these, you know, they're not closed systems, so until you actually seal it, you've got potential of vapour exposure, residues, and I'm sure anybody that uses sharps bins, you'll know, you go to it, there's always substances on the top that are suspect. And also incorrect assembly, and these are things that, you know, are issues faced in busy chemo units.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we could minimise the impact on the environment. Now, there are 3 attacks to this, for want of a better word. So first of all, the actual production. when we were investigating this, we spent a lot of time with our sustainability manager within the trust, and he actually felt that the production of the plastic versus the thicker plastic of the sharps bin was actually better. For example, used far less raw material and therefore lowered the carbon footprint. So that was one angle that we hadn't actually looked at. So the thin plastic compared to the thick plastic in some ways better for the environment. Transport. Now, obviously this is a big thing. Everybody is aware of the amount of traffic that's around us currently. It was felt, again, when we had discussions with our manager, that actually it was a lower carbon footprint for transporting lighter, smaller bags as opposed to the heavy sharps bins. So again, it's looking at increased efficiencies there. And then finally, disposal. Now, this is again sort of covers several issues. First of all, the actual incineration of the cytotoxic waste. All cytotoxic waste has to be incinerated. We've been informed that actually you can burn a lot more smaller plastic bags compared to the number of sharps bins. So actually you're using less natural resources, but also the actual emissions that are released from that burning. Secondly, again, it's the amount of storage. I think it's fair to say, I don't know how you all work, but we have a cupboard at the end of our chemotherapy unit, and it was easier to have a big cart that could store all the plastic in, composed to lots of sharps bins that are stacked up, and then you obviously run the risk of the sharps bins falling over. If they've not been correctly assembled, that opens a whole wealth of other problems. So actually by having a big skip that the purple bags containing the cytotoxic waste could go into was actually better, and it meant less. I know this sounds a bit bizarre, but in a busy NHS hospital, it was less travel for the porters, etc., going back and forth with a big cart as opposed to lots of different sharps bins loading them and unloading them. So again, that can be summarised by lower carbon footprint, increased efficiency, and as I've already said, lower wasted of natural gases and resources. So we are very fortunate that we have an environmental and sustainability manager, and actually I think he summed up quite nicely the work that we were doing, that basically that said it was an example of innovative clinical practice that fully supported the trust and his vision of sustainability. So it was a big tick from them. So that was good. That was our first battle, for want of a word.
First real buy-in.
Achieved. The second thing, and I think it's fair to say, and again you touched on it this morning, finance within an NHS trust is a real driver. Now, it is that very fine line, quality versus finance. We'd already found the quality side of it, and actually if we could demonstrate that the finance is linked in as well, then obviously we was on a bit of a winner. So again, we looked at this in different ways. It was actually more cost effective for us to dispose of the bags as opposed to the bins. Again, that was down to how much it cost per tonnage of disposable waste. So if you think how heavy a sharps bin is compared to a light plastic bag, that was where that saving came in. But the other piece of work we did is that we actually looked at the number of sharps bins that we used and compared that to the amount of plastic we would require in a Pactosafe. So I'll get the details up. So to do that, what we did is that we looked at how many chemotherapy treatments we gave over a year. Now, we were able to do that from our patient centre. From that, we were also, from our procurement department, we were also able to identify the number of sharps bins that we actually able to use. Now, I think it's, to be fair, take these figures, these are obviously our trust figures from last year, so they could all be very different, but I think what it shows is you don't realise how much money you spend on just disposing of waste. And that is literally the cost of your bins. That's not taking in the burning or anything like that.
Or the actual clinical bins that you just put your clinical waste. This is purely the sharps bins.
And I don't know, well, I'd like to think with us, within our practice, if you did have a spillage or you had a contamination of your PPE, that all has to go in the sharps bin as well. So then you're increasing what you've actually put in that sharps bins. And I don't know about you, but how many of you have failed audits for the having wrong things in sharps bins? You try and explain it because actually it's because it's cytotoxic waste. So we were then able to compare that to the amount of plastic that we felt would use the same amount of waste in sharps bins compared to the amount of plastic that we would need to use by what the plastic could house. And actually you can see that we came up with a 41% saving. Now that was based on having three Pactosafe units within our chemotherapy units. You'll see later on in our presentation we've actually got more than that. So what we're hoping is that we can truly demonstrate that this saving and potentially a little bit more. So this for us was, again, another real winner. So with the finance, the quality and the effect that it had on the environment, we were able to demonstrate that actually this is a good proposal to take forward. So they were the three things. So having looked into it a bit further, done our work, they were our three key drivers. But it was also fair to say that we also came up with some other efficiencies along the lines. The first one was the actual storage. So the Pactosafe plastic comes in rolls, in boxes, which was a lot easier to store than a number of sharps bins. I don't know about you, but within our trust, basically nothing can be stored on the floor. Everything has to be stored on shelves. So for us, that was a real bonus. I've also already touched on this about the number of trips going to and from the waste cupboards, and that kind of linked into, I know it's quite old now, but the work we did a couple of years ago with productive wards and things, so that linked in nicely to that. And then also the other item that I've already mentioned about the amount that you can store within, for example, a 660 litre waste cart, so you can get more bags in compared to the number of cytotoxic waste bins.
So how did we gain engagement in Pactosafe within our trust? So following our initial meeting, we needed to set up a further meeting with Lisa's Medical and key individuals from key departments within our trust. We recognised that it was essential to be able to get engagement and support from these key areas for us to be able to move forward with our proposal. So at the meeting we had clinical nurses from the units, we had our management team, and we had representatives from infection control, EME, health and safety, procurement and estates and facilities. Now we had very, very positive feedback from this meeting. Infection control were very, very keen on the system. Infection control is something our trust is very hot on. And they found that they liked the system because it met with all our trust protocols. They also liked the design and felt that it would be something that was easy to clean. And they said it looked very, very professional, so that was very good. Although the Pactosafe isn't actually a medical device, we still wanted to get some feedback from EME. And they were very happy with the system and were happy to back us in our proposal. Health and safety the same, they had no major concerns and were happy to support anything that was going to actually improve safety within our trust. Procurement, we needed to get their back in to see how cost effective implementing the new systems were going to be, and for them to be able to set up purchasing so that we knew we'd be able to get all the equipment that we needed, the plastic, because this has to come over from Sweden. And finally, and most importantly, estates and facilities. We needed to have their buy-in to know that they would be able to support us in being able to store the waste, to be able to move the waste around the hospital, and support us with portering staff, etc. So setting up the initial service, at local level everybody was happy, so we were happy then to take it further. So we needed to get agreement from the directorate management team, so we had to set up a meeting to take our proposal forward. This meant presenting Pactosafe to the medical director at the trust clinical management team and putting forward our proposal with a view to implementation.
Okay, so we were fortunate that all went relatively straightforward without a hitch actually. Sometimes I think you're probably aware trying to introduce new systems within busy NHS hospitals is quite difficult. But actually I feel we were lucky that we had support from the Trust and they were quite happy for us to move forward. So we decided that we was going to do a 3-month evaluation, and as I've already said, we actually did this with 3 Pactosafe units. So we chose to do the trial in our busiest chemotherapy unit, but we also did it, it was just the way it worked, there was no particular reason, but we actually did it over Christmas and New Year. Now at the time we thought, oh, why are we introducing something at Christmas and New Year when you're already trying to cram a 5-day week into 4 days? But actually we thought if it could cope with us in our busiest period, then actually for the rest of the year it would give us a good indication of actually if we would be able to meet our demands. Throughout the evaluation, it became quite clear quite quickly that if we were going to roll out with this fully in the chemotherapy unit, that actually we would need more than the 3 units that we trialled. So the way our chemotherapy unit is set up is it's an old ward, so we actually have 3 bays and we have 8 chemotherapy chairs in 2 bays and 6 in the other. So 1 unit in each chemotherapy bay, for want of a better word, was pushing it a little bit. So during the evaluation we did still have to use some of our cytotoxic waste bins, but we sort of played while we were there. So for example, we had a day where we brought all of them into 1 bay so we could try and establish how many we would actually need. To obviously make sure that we were using the equipment correctly, we demonstrated it to all the staff. Now, I'm sure you're all aware, trying to implement change within the NHS isn't always easy. So we did have to do quite a lot of work, and that is ongoing about why we've changed or why we felt it was good to change our practice. We also trained, everybody was trained, and actually it became quite apparent quite quickly that it would be a good thing to go forward with a super user. So Nina was identified as our super user within the unit at the time, and actually throughout the evaluation she sort of became our troubleshooter. So if there were problems you would link with the company, but also give additional training should the staff need it. It's not a difficult unit to use, but it's more of a troubleshooting. So if this doesn't work for whatever reason, how do you do it, etc, etc. So the super users were absolutely key. And then finally, at the end of the 3-month evaluation, as with anything, we did an evaluation from our staff. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. Nina's just going to talk about some of the initial problems that we encountered within the evaluation.
So as Charlotte was saying, introducing any new system into practice, there's always issues. Now, the main issue that we encountered was staff engagement. And I'm sure you will all relate to this. Within healthcare, there are those that are happy to move with new ideas and those that like to work historically. And it was changing that mindset with some of the nursing staff that was one of the biggest issues. But once they actually realised why we're implementing it, the fact that these systems were going to improve safety for themselves and their patients, they actually started to buy into the system and engage them a lot better. Another issue was the correct usage of the system. So we had the initial training, but we soon found that because it was such a busy unit, and over Christmas and New Year we were treating about 90 odd patients a day. Staff were so busy, they were just putting stuff in, sealing it, putting stuff in, sealing it, and we were finding that the waste was backing up into the wheels, and that was causing issues. So we had to get staff to understand that they were responsible for putting the waste in, sealing it, making sure there was enough space for the next person. And if the bag needed to be emptied, they could get one of the CSWs or myself to come along and sort that out for them. So it took a little bit of time to get them to understand that it was their responsibility. Also, I've encountered a couple of episodes where I came in the following morning to find chemotherapy in the top of the Pactosafe not been sealed, which was totally against the reason why we were implementing these systems. So again, it was a case of educating the staff so that they understood that by sealing it, there was no exposure. So, as Charlotte said, as a super user, I was able to go around the units and troubleshoot. with the backing of Nisus Medical. We also had some fantastic YouTube videos that we could show the staff to break down how to operate the system, and that helped a lot. And as Charlotte said, the number of units that we were trialling just was not enough to cope with our busy times and with the amount of cytotoxic waste that we were actually having to dispose of. So during the evaluation, there was a period where we were still using the cytotoxic sharps bins. Do's and oh yes, as part of the troubleshooting, we also introduced some do's and don'ts. So we actually made a do and don't list to put onto the system for the nurses, so they knew what they could put in it, what they weren't allowed to put in it, etc. And that did help.
Okay, so as I touched on earlier, we actually completed a service evaluation of the system after the 3-month initial trial. Now, okay, it was a formal evaluation at the end, but throughout the whole period, obviously we were working with staff, we were getting their questions, we were finding out what they felt about it. As Nina said, initially there was those concerns, why are we changing, etc., etc. But actually the feedback that we got in the end was really positive. So we had 10 surveys completed. Now, that doesn't sound a lot, but for a small unit, that was pretty much nearly every nurse that completed one. Now, out of those surveys, one of the questions that we asked was, are you aware, it's a bit like what you were saying this morning, are you aware of what the risks are of working in a cytotoxic chemotherapy environment? And actually, I was really pleased to see that 9 members of staff came back saying, yes, they were aware of the risks, so that was good. But then we went on to further to say, can you name or are you aware of any recent or historic research that supports that? And actually only 4 were able to evidence that. And I think, to be fair, the 4 that were the ones that had recently undergone the chemotherapy course. So it's what you kind of expect. But as you can see, the things that they felt, so they did say about things catching, but then actually they said once they knew what to do, they could sort it out. It was good that they said they felt it was easy to clean. Obviously, working in an environment that's predominantly with patients, you're cleaning things all the time. Having it mobile was also good as well, because the staff were able to take it to the patient. So if you were sitting there giving, I don't know, FEC chemotherapy, you can just dispose straight away of your syringes, etc., straight into the Pactosafe. So they felt that was quite good. So overall, it was a good piece of work we got back. And I think the final thing that was good to say is that actually all of them would recommend using it to somebody else. So by the end of it, although there was those initial teething problems and those initial concerns, by the end of it, actually everybody said they were happy to use it and they would recommend it. And actually, we have some agency nurses that work with us, and they were going back to their units and saying, oh, they're doing this over at Marsden. And so we did have some inquiries from other matrons, so that was good to see.
I have to say as well, we've had really, really good feedback from our patients. They are really, really fascinated by the systems. And I've actually had I've got a patient who oversees 3 veterinary practices that is very keen in introducing it into their line of work. So we've got really good feedback, not only from our staff, but from our patients.
Okay, so what was the next stage after this? So after we had the successful evaluation, we met again with all the key players back in the room, actually. So the company, ourselves, procurement, estates, facilities, and we had quite an open and frank discussion about it. And I think it was really keen that actually, no, this was something that we wanted to move forward with and actually roll out across our whole directorate. So that meant the other 2 chemotherapy units, one over at Pembury, but also our inpatient ward. So obviously, going into an inpatient ward, we have rolled it out, but we're coming up with different things that was a problem to what we accounted with in the evaluation, which is what you would expect, because obviously different units work differently. One of the biggest things for our inpatient unit is the fact that we're a haematology unit and a lot of the patients are inside rooms, as you would expect. So when you take your chemotherapy trolley in, and then you take your Pactosafe in and all of those, and you're trying to juggle it all around, you've got your drip stand and bits and pieces, space is an issue, but we're working ways around that. But I think it was also really key to identify in each of those areas a super user that Nina could have links with. So, for example, if there was a problem and Nina was off, if you was in the other unit, you could ring around and then hopefully there was someone available that would be able to help and troubleshoot that. Training was obviously key. Obviously, the staff who had evaluated the system knew what they were doing, but then we had to roll it out across the other chemotherapy units and the inpatient ward. The inpatient ward was a little bit more trickier to do the training, just because of trying to get the turnover of staff, whereas in a chemotherapy unit, obviously you can just grab half the unit and then the other half. So it took a little bit longer to train people. There's probably still people you're training now within the inpatient unit, but actually it's not difficult to pick up, and they've probably self-taught themselves from the super users as well. The other thing we've done, just to demonstrate that we had obviously trained all our staff, is that we developed a competency record, which is to evidence their training, and that is stored with all their other training records, such as their annual chemotherapy competencies, etc. And we were talking recently, that is something we'll probably update yearly, just to check that everyone's happy, they know what they're doing, they're still realising the benefits, etc.
So, next steps. So, in order to increase our staff safety, Charlotte is actually currently investigating closed systems. And after listening to everybody today, it's something we are very, very keen to get into the trust. And hopefully, if we can implement that alongside Pactosafe, we will completely reduce any risk of accidental exposure from cytotoxic drugs. So it's something we're really, really keen to work on and get into place hopefully quite quickly. We are considering getting more Pactosafe systems. I know our unit over at Tunbridge Wells is very, very keen to have at least 2 more. They would like 1 system per 3 chairs. So for them, they're not finding that they're too bulky. They're actually finding that they can cope within their units. So that's really good feedback. And as Charlotte was saying, going back to the key players at the start of our evaluation and discussing with them to see how we can roll Pactosafe out further within the trust. So maybe introducing it into pharmacy, and I know infection control are very, very keen on using the system in other areas. So hopefully we're going to see a few more down the track.
I think pharmacy, Paul, you highlighted it this morning in your talk, they're really keen because of the actual waste disposal within the actual aseptic units. So it's exactly what you were saying. So they do it all and wrap it up and then just leave it in a bin. And that's one of the things that our waste manager has actually picked up on. He was like, so we should really be using Pactosafe within those units. So they're fortunate because we've done that piece of work. I think they've got the backing really of the trust within other departments. So it would be interesting to see whether that does get taken up and whether people
we've
take it
done the hard
forward.
work, they can just roll them out.
And then finally, I hope we've got this right, that we are currently the leading users of Pactosafe across Europe, so we're actually quite pleased
Proud
to have done that. So that is it really in a nutshell. I've included some of the studies and things that we've looked at, pretty much what we've already discussed about today, and obviously some other resources that you can find helpful. And like the girls were saying this morning, our contact details are in your pack, so if you did want any further information or if there's anything you're not sure, then please feel free to drop us an email, and like yourselves, we're happy to share and help with anything that you might need further support with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Any questions?
You would.
Thank you very much. Very well. It's very interesting. I just wondered whether you had done any baseline surface wipes, just to have an understanding of what your exposure was before you implemented it, so that you could then maybe have that as your evaluation, or would you plan to maybe do something just at this point anyway?
Hopefully before we introduce closed systems.
In an ideal world, what we would have liked to have done was introduce some wipe testing. However, I think we were pretty much in a situation, a bit like what you were saying this morning, that if we had done wipe tests and we had found a level what do we do
know.
next? So how do you respond to your staff? How do you say, actually this is acceptable, etc.? So what our plans would be is to consider doing waste testing before we introduce the closed system and then do it after. In an ideal world, and on hindsight, yes, it probably would have been a good thing to do, but we obviously had some concerns about how we would do that. And I think the other thing with the clinical wipe testing, it's something we really want to look into, but it's how you then manage those expectations of your staff. So, for example, so it's a bit like monitoring staff. So if you say, okay, you've been exposed, it's a bit like what you were saying this morning. How do you then manage that? So I think we need to have the information to be able to say to the staff, well, okay, this is an acceptable level or not. So I feel for having some of the stuff we've discussed today that actually we could move that forward.
How are the machines maintained?
Oh, this is your department.
They're very, very simple to use. So the super users in each area have a daily checklist. So they come in the morning, they just make sure the pedals are working okay, that the ceiling bars are working okay, that the units are charged. So once the unit's fully charged, depending on how busy your unit is, they can last for up to 2 weeks on battery. Plastic is replaced very, very easily, so it's just quite a very simple procedure. The plastic's on a roll, and you just literally pop it over the funnel of the Pactosafe, feed it through, make a seal, and then it's ready for use. There are issues that if you use the system while it's charging, you can overheat it, and that is something we did encounter on a couple of occasions, so that's something that you need to be aware of. But they're very, very simple systems to operate. There's not much on it that can actually go wrong. Very easy to wipe down, easy to move around.
We've just currently started using it in the Freeman in Newcastle. We've got 2 machines already, but what we're finding is, like yourselves,
Not enough.
the bags just keep
Yeah.
backing up and stuff, and it's a case of getting everybody involved and getting them, so being here today and being yours. But what we were thinking was, you know how we always kind of used the trolleys with a bit over the top, like a blue tray on it?
Yeah.
So we're finding that we're having to take that and Pactosafe and your other trolley, and with the amount of patients that we've got, you're literally on top of them with all this equipment. So that's what we're finding a wee bit of a struggle just now, but I think that'll be a solution for tomorrow with the guys.
With the emptying of the waste, you know, that was one of our issues, but it's getting better, because we did think about actually getting domestics involved as well. So they could, you know, when they come round to check normal clinical bins, they could actually see if it needed emptying. But I think once staff realise it takes no longer to empty the plastic there than it is to close a sharps bin and set up a new one. And it's just getting people's mindsets into doing that.
And I think as like the lead chemotherapy nurse, that was one of the things I kept saying. I was like, I'd like to think you wouldn't keep stuffing things in a full sharps bin. I know there has been evidence to do that. But I was like, your responsibility is to shut that sharps bin. It's exactly the same with the Pactosafe. But I think you can undersell yourselves a little bit. We're very fortunate that I have obviously Nina, and we have really good healthcare assistants. And actually they're constantly, so if
Check-in.
the nurses like check in, so when they're bringing patients in, etc.
Yeah.
The other thing we found, it was one of the things that they complained about on our inpatient unit. Now, obviously, the number of inpatient chemotherapy regimes to what we're doing in a day unit is significantly less. So what I've actually said to the girls on the inpatient ward is, like, at night, as part of the healthcare assistant's role, is just empty the bag and then you're ready to go for the next day, because actually I don't know, but within our haematology unit, we've probably only got 6 people out of 18 on chemotherapy at a time, for example, and it's not of the volume that you're doing in the day unit. So I think it's just different ways of working how it works best within your
I
department.
think we definitely need more.
Yeah, you will find you'll get into a routine of using them. So, you know, we find we do our treatment, we wrap everything up, it goes in the bag straight into the Pactosafe. So
I think where it's predominant you need more is like if you've got someone sitting there doing effect, for example, because they're there with it the whole time. If you're doing bag changes in, obviously it's always rotating it around. So I think that was where it was key to have a couple.
yeah. Now, we also found just working between haematology and oncology, I do venesections as part of my job. So we can actually use the Pactosafes to dispose of the blood bags. So they don't have to have the cytotoxic bag. We can put a clinical bag and, again, dispose of all the blood products in the same way. So that's made it cheaper than using sharps bins.
Another thing which we didn't mention as well, but I liked about it, I will come to Tracy, sorry, is that I know it doesn't happen very often, but on the very rare occasion that something goes wrong and you have to send back chemotherapy to pharmacy or whatever reason, you could send it back safely in a completely sealed. I quite liked that because you can cut it and send it sealed. So I don't know if you have a faulty pump or something like that,
Not
you
even
can.
that, it's like putting them in somebody's reaction.
Yeah,
put the
exactly,
change in the bag,
exactly.
Put it into that.
You know
Yeah.
it's completely safe.
That was one of the things that I really liked about it. You can, and again, I know we're here for cytotoxic chemotherapy, but if you had a unit of blood that you needed to send back to the blood lab for whatever reason, again, you can send it off sealed. So, sorry, Tracy.
Right. Just one question. Have you discarded all of your sharp bins, or are you still using a portion?
We do have some sharps bins,
But not cytotoxic.
but not cytotoxic. So,
The yellow needs to be
Yeah.
pre-mixed, things like that.
Yeah.
Because that's what I couldn't get my head around. I know we don't use sharps, but the needles we've got are still, although they're blunt, they're still
Yeah.
quite sharp.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we use safety needles, so if we're doing a subcut treatment, as long as that needle's sheathed, that can go into the Pactosafe.
Yeah. So
But we
your
do-
Portacath needles, you say
Yeah, Portacath grippers.
But your standard pre-med needles, you wouldn't want to...
No,
sort of
they
get
would have to go in the
rid of
sharps
the
bin, or your little
so-
ampules,
Yeah.
those sort of things.
but again, you're putting considerably less in the sharps bin to what you was putting in.
Yeah.
More questions?
What about a spillage? If you have spillage, do you have to clean
Same,
it up? Where
same
does that go
thing.
from
If,
there?
if there was a chemo spillage, you would use your standard protocol, clean up your spill, all your PPE, everything could go straight into that Pactosafe. You seal it, you know it's completely safe.
I might have already missed that at the beginning, but how is it highlighted that it's a cytotoxic waste? As like our cytotoxic bins, the purple lids?
Yeah, we have purple bags.
Oh, okay.
So the Pactosafe plastic is clear,
Yeah.
but the bag that you put into the bin that sits underneath the system is purple, so it's classed as cytotoxic. And when we dispose of that bag, we do the same as we used to with sharps bins. We put a little yellow tag onto it so that we can trace where it goes from us to incineration. So you can change the colour of the bags. If it wasn't cytotoxic, you could put a clinical bag if you were just using clinical waste.
More questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.